Hi everybody and welcome back to the channel. My name is Angie Wallace, and one of the things I'm quite well known for is producing submerged flower images, many of which have gone on to do very well in competitions such as International Garden Photographer of the Year. Today's video is going to be providing you with my 6 top tips to help you get the best images possible. So let's dive straight into doing those. My first tip is going to be securing the flower. Obviously, you don't want your flowers floating off in the middle of taking your photos. And the best way that I have found to secure the flowers is quite simply by using what we call a flower frog. Now, I'd never heard of these before I even did this, and I was lucky that I was given a few tips on using these. This particular one that you see here, it is a very heavy weight. I think it's made out of lead and all these thick spikes on there, and it'll really hold substantial flower. And what I love about this one is that it's got the straight edge rather than the round ones, which means it can be flush against the edge of your tank, right, pushing the flower against the glass. And it's much better than the round ones that you can see here. There are other alternatives that you could use, such as before I used these, I used to use some heavy, thick slate coasters that you would put your cups on, and I would use some wire to attach the flowers onto those coasters. So if I glued some wire and left them sticking up as spikes so that could either go up inside the stem of the flower or wind around the stem of the flower to hold those in place. And here you can see on your left just holding some little blossoms in place there. And on your right, you can see my old slate coasters, which I still use. And sometimes I'll use other objects. Sort of, this is a piece of copper, which is fairly heavy, or these like bolts and things, or a candle holder. And this is invisible thread, so I can wrap this around the objects and wrap it around the flower and then let it float above these objects there. My second and probably the most important thing, if I want you to take away today, is remove the bubbles off your tank. It may seem obvious, but sometimes when you've got so many steps to go through and setting it all up, you can overlook this. And I did this last week. I did 2 photo shoots last week, and I'd have everything set up and prepped, and I took a rest before I actually went into the photo shoot. And I went back in wearing a different pair of glasses. I didn't have my close-up glasses on. I didn't look close up, and a load of bubbles had built up in the tank that I didn't even notice from the angle I was standing at. And of course, it ruined my shoot. It doesn't necessarily completely ruin it, but it took me an hour and 20 minutes to remove all of the bubbles just from one photograph. So I highly recommend removing them. And one of the best ways I've found of doing that is using a skewer, a simple metal or wooden skewer that you would use for kebabs, and just wipe that along the inside of the tank, and that'll dislodge all of the bubbles. But make sure you do it front and back. That'll make a big difference. See it there, you can see it looks a lot better. I haven't quite finished, I haven't done the back there. But here is an example of one I did last week where I forgot to remove the bubbles. There's some on the back, you can see that I've left a bouquet up here, and you can very easily see there are the bubbles on the front of the tank all over there. And I'll take you into Photoshop and we'll zoom in there and have a better look. So you can see looking around the image here, this took an hour and 20 minutes to get rid of all of these. And while we're in here, I'll address another issue, an extra tip. These are tulips, and you can see all these silvery sort of bits. They're basically produced by the air being trapped on the surface of the tulip. And you will get that with a lot of flowers, particularly with tulips. However, I have found that if you place the tulips in the tank and leave them for 24 hours and go back later, you'll find a lot of this is dislodged and softened, so there's not much of this silvery trapped air pockets left, and that helps a lot in your photo shoot. So you can see it's well worth clearing those bubbles away, and definitely you don't want to be wasting an hour on a photo removing all of those bubbles. So I'm going to take you through a photo shoot while I'm giving you these tips. And this is one that I did last week, just with two tulips that I had sat there in a vase. And you can see another thing I've used in securing these is floristry wire up the centre here. And yes, it looks a little bit unsightly now, but that gets a lot better as you go through the shoot and it's covered up with the milk and stuff like that. So I'll start the video going and just adding some milk in there. Now just look at the tank and look at all of the reflections in this tank. This has been caused because I've got my recording camera at an angle. Now, if it's straight on, I'm not going to get as much of the reflection. However, you still get reflections from whatever is opposite your tank. And what's opposite my tank is a couple of doors with all of these windows in there. So what I do is I cover them up with some black material. However, I have found another way to get around this. And if you see on the left-hand side of this image here, there's a piece of black foam board and it's got a circle cut out of it. And what I do now is I put this over the lens on my camera and I secure it there. The camera's already sat on a tripod, and this comes, the bottom of the foam board rests on my table, and it just works out nicely where the hole is cut. I measured it all up. And because the camera is a lot closer to the tank, it will stop all of those reflections from opposite the tank. So that'll save you a lot of time and effort in trying to remove any reflections there. See, I'm going on with my photo shoot. And you can't even see the bubbles that were on the front of the tank, but believe me, they were there. And you can see the reflections as well, so you know what I'm going on about. We'll speed this up a little bit from here before I add in the next tip. Another thing that you can do, it wasn't even included in my main tips, but use a remote shutter release or a cable release. And the reason for that is if you're behind your camera, you're going to be causing reflections, especially if your hair's blonde like mine is. Yeah, it's going to be picked up in the reflections of the glass there. So I stand to one side and I use a remote shutter release there. And that's the result. I use flash, so that's my result. It will be slightly different if you don't use flash though. And my next tip is to strategically add your colours. Now you'll be seeing me going in with either a syringe or a pipette, which I'll clean before I actually put it in the tank. And then you go in and you carefully and slowly add little bits of colour strategically. I have added it strategically to the tulips, but also here you can see me adding it to the top of the tank and mixing it up to give it a bit movement. That's another strategy as well, and that produces just a whole other different effect. And there you can see the effects here, and I love that. You've got to give all of the inks time to just settle. This video is sped up 2 or 3 times the speed that it would normally happen. So another tip that I'm going to give you is plan your sequence of colours and have all of them prepared. I use just a Ferrero Rocher tray full of syringes and pipettes that I fill with my colours. And what I mean by planning your sequence of colours is I'm using my light colours first. So I'll use the whites first and then I'll slowly add in other colours. But I'm very careful about what I add next because the last thing I want is for it to all end up very muddy and brown. You can add in a dark colour after your white, and as you can see, you can put in the white again on top of the darker colours. And then reverse again, add more colours in. So these pinks work nicely because I've already got the white in there. And that gives a nice dramatic photo there. And you can still add in plenty of white after you've added your colours. It sort of creates these little clouds of white. So here you can see how the colours have worked out really nicely there. And the pinks and purples and whites all go nicely together. I wouldn't want to sort of suddenly mix in, say, like a green would not mix well. This is what I'm talking about, is planning your colours. This is something I love doing, is just adding a colour from above as well, once I've got some on the flowers. But sometimes you need to blow some of the colour off your flowers, just so they still show up. And that's a nice dramatic effect from the purples there. So as you can see, I'm having a bit of fun here. I'm starting to experiment because I've done the main part of my shoot. I'm quite happy with. I've finished that, and I'm really just starting to experiment more and going a little bit crazy with the colours and adding loads in the top as well as on the flowers. So really get a bit experimental, have a bit of fun with it. That's my last tip for today. So I'll just let the rest of the video run and show you all of the end results here. I'm at the end of my shoot, and you can see the petals have fallen off one of the tulips. And what I'm doing here is I've got a piece of glass to hold the tulips right up against the edge of the tank while I'm adding in some inks. It does get a bit messy, but you can get some really nice close-up shots at this point. Adding some very dark blues in there, which will show off the yellow and white nicely, and then adding some white in, and that works well, doesn't it? So that's pretty much that shoot. And these are the images that resulted, and every one of them took over an hour of cleaning up the bubbles. But I think you'll agree that I've got some nice dramatic images, a nice ethereal look. And I hope you take on board some of those tips and get to experimenting and having a little bit of fun yourself. If you want some more tips, do check up my submerged flower tutorial on Etsy. It's quite cheap, it's an hour long, but it is packed with tips there to help you. And it'll help you avoid all of the things that cause havoc with these shoots. And with that all wrapped up, we'll say goodbye for now and look forward to seeing you in my next video soon. Thank you. Bye.